Memory is not the past, it is the echo that time cannot silence. The wind scraped over the sand like a whisper, trying to remember its name. In the emptiness of the high desert, nothing moved but the dust and the dying sun. Light stretched long across jagged rock, casting shadows like bones into the cradle of the earth. No roads led here, no signals reached. Even the birds had learned not to fly over the place the old ones once touched. This was country, a land older than memory, where stories walked the earth long before language had form. The people who belonged to this place spoke of the dreaming, of ancestor beings who shaped the rivers and ranges, who sang the land into being and watched from stone and sky still. Here the earth did not forget. It watched. It waited. Beneath the shifting layers of sand and time, something else waited. It had no pulse, no breath, no beating heart. But it remembered. It remembered the fall, the tearing of sky, the cities crumbling as the anchors failed. Time unraveled like thread from a dying loom, and in the final moments, the builders had buried what they could not undo. They had called it preservation. It was not. Now, after ages beyond memory, a pressure changed. A crack opened in the fossilized bedrock. A bone shifted against stone. A fragment of shaped obsidian, etched with symbols older than fire, tilted in its resting place. Above ground, far above, the wind died for just a moment. Something had stirred, not life, but memory. The red earth remembered. Dr. Elias Trenholm crouched low in the trench, knee grinding into a bed of cracked stone, brush in hand, coaxing dust from what he hoped was the spine of a long-dead sauropod. The sun was a hammer overhead, baking the scrublands of the Pilbara into a shimmering furnace. But Elias hardly noticed the heat anymore, not since he stopped feeling much of anything. The desert here was old, not just ancient, eternal. The traditional custodians who'd granted permission for the dig spoke of this place with quiet reverence. Stories told of dreaming beings who had walked here, shaping the land as they moved. This wasn't empty land, it was sacred and alive. To Elias, it was fitting. The past had a way of burying things it didn't want found, like memories, like grief. It had been 5 years since the accident. 5 years since the phone call that split his world open like a fault line. His wife Annie, his son Jacob, his baby girl May, gone in a flash flood south of Broome. What wasn't crushed was swept away. He hadn't been home since. Not really. Instead, he buried himself in bones. He listened to rocks. He chased silence across the desert. A quiet voice broke through the heat shimmer. "Hey, Doc," Layla called from the ridge. "You need water?" He waved her off without looking up. His brush had found something, not vertebrae, something wrong. It was too smooth, too perfect. Not stone, glass-like. He leaned in, heart ticking a little faster. A curve, glossy, blackened but not by fire. It held a subtle shimmer, like oil on water. As he cleared the sediment, markings emerged, etched into its surface. Elegant spirals, arcs, not letters, not language, symbols. He blinked hard, not again. "Leela," he called, "bring the scanner, and tell Jared to get the soil core reader." They gathered under the tarp where the scanner glowed dimly against the midday glare. Elias crouched beside it, staring down at the readings. The team, Leela Endure, geologist and quiet voice of reason, early 30s, practical, precise, cautious. Jared Holt, field tech, mid-20s, opinionated, ambitious, always a little too loud. Shay Morgan, chemist and sedimentologist, in her 40s, dry humor, loyal to Elias. Jared leaned against the crate with a smirk. "So, what are we looking at here? Another broken satellite dish?" "It's fused into the fossil layer," Elias said, ignoring him. "Look at the matrix. This isn't a surface intrusion." "Still could have been some World War relic," Jared muttered. "Japanese mines, Cold War junk, there's all sorts of metal scattered out here." Shay peered at the tablet. "Except this one's giving us next to zero decay. No oxidation, no patina." Layla added, "The density scan's off the chart. It's not iron, not titanium, something else." Jared snorted. "So what? Magic metal? Come on, look, I respect you, Doc, but you've got a reputation." Elias looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Jared said, shrugging, "you're the guy who keeps chasing weird stories. The one who wrote a whole paper on fossil deformation and called it memory structures. The one who's still, talking to spirits out here." Layla cut in. "That's enough, Jared." "No, he wants to say it," Elias said, voice quiet. "Let him." Jared hesitated. I'm just saying, people talk, and Kessler's not thrilled about the direction this project's taking. Elias stood. Kessler isn't here, but his voice was. Later that night, Elias's sat phone rang. The old signal crackled, bouncing off the repeater they'd rigged weeks ago. A familiar voice came through, clipped and formal. Elias, it's Grant. Professor Grant Kessler, department head at the University of Western Australia. Elias's former mentor and once a close friend, now mostly a gatekeeper. You submitted samples without peer review, Kessler said. I submitted anomalies for preliminary analysis. You submitted fossils fused to unidentifiable alloys embedded in a Cretaceous formation. Do you want to make headlines or discoveries? I want the truth. No, you want validation. Elias, you're not in a position to court controversy. You're on thin ice as it is. There was a long pause. You don't believe me, Elias said. I believe in data, and I believe you're still grieving things you won't talk about. That one hit like a stone. I'm putting the dig on hold, Kessler added, until we can send a proper review team. Then, the click of disconnection. That night, Elias sat alone by the fire, the artifact in his hands. The firelight flickered across its markings, ancient, deliberate, untouched by time. He whispered to no one, "What are you?" He didn't expect an answer, but the wind paused, just for a moment. In the silence, he thought of something an elder once told him, sitting beneath the stars beyond the ridge. Sometimes the old ones leave a mark, not a footprint, but a ripple. If you listen with your bones, you'll hear it. The next morning, Elias returned to the trench alone. The others were prepping camp logistics, inventory, generator fuel, water levels. He didn't tell them what he was digging for. The early light was soft, casting long shadows across the ridges like fingers reaching into memory. A faint breeze stirred the spinifex, and for just a moment the silence felt deeper than usual, thicker, as though something in the earth was listening. He dug carefully, his movements slow, deliberate. The rock was stubborn, but not unkind, as if it was allowing him through. 6 inches deeper, nestled in limestone, he found it. A skull, long, narrow, smooth, humanoid, but not human. He stared at it, not breathing. Then, like a ripple through his chest, something moved. Not physical, not pain, a presence, a thought that was not a thought. He heard no words, saw no vision, but felt something old brush against him. A knowing, a resonance that hummed somewhere beneath his ribs, faint and strange, like a forgotten name, whispered too far away to hear clearly. And then it was gone. He sat back in the trench, shaken, breath shallow. The wind rose softly, brushing over the site like a sigh. Then his sat pad buzzed. Unknown contact. A single image, a weathered stone tablet bearing the exact same spiral markings. Beneath it, one line, "You're not the first to find them, but you may be the first who listens." Then coordinates. Deep in the interior, beyond mapped tracks, where the land folded into itself like a wound. And a name, Dr. Celine Voss. The red road wound like a scar through the skin of the land. For hours, Elias had driven in silence, the tires crunching over gravel and sun-bleached clay, a plume of ochre dust rising behind him like a ghost that couldn't keep up. The sky above was a high, merciless blue. To the north, ghost gums shimmered silver and white. To the south, spinifex rolled like brittle sea across the open plain. This was country, older than stone, older than time. A place that remembered every footfall. The road had ended half an hour ago, vanishing into a wash of dry floodplain and ridged dunes. He followed no track now, just instinct, memory, and the final coordinates she'd sent him. A set of numbers scrawled in her hand on the back of a weathered envelope. There were no signs, no signal, not even birds anymore. But he felt the land watching, not in malice, not in welcome either, just watching. The elders had told him once, years ago during a visit to the Pilbara, that some parts of the desert are asleep and others are merely waiting. You don't own the land out here. You pass through it, and if you're quiet enough, maybe it lets you leave. Elias had never forgotten that. He topped a low ridge, the sun stinging his eyes. Before him, the landscape opened into a wide salt pan ringed by jagged rock. At the center, barely visible beneath the camouflage of dust and brush, sat a shelter built into the earth, canted walls of iron and bush timber, blended so well into the slope that it looked like it had grown there. He pulled the truck to a stop, turned off the engine. Silence collapsed around him like a held breath. No vehicle, no footprints, no smoke. but he knew she was here. He stepped out into the heat. The air was still, thick with the scent of scorched eucalyptus and the faint mineral tang of salt and stone. The only movement was the wind curling through the rocks like a whisper. As he descended the ridge on foot, he passed 3 stone markers, flat slabs etched with faint spiral lines, positioned in a triangle facing inward, not placed by accident. They reminded him of the dreaming stories, how ancestral beings had moved through the land in spirals, singing the shapes of rivers, ridges, and stars into existence. How some places still held their echo, long after the voices fell silent. This felt like one of those places, sacred, untouched, waiting. The wind shifted. A figure stepped out from the shadow of the shelter. She didn't wave, didn't call his name. She just watched him descend, barefoot on the dust, arms folded, the hem of her shirt tugged by the breeze. Elias stopped a few meters from her, unsure if the heat haze was playing tricks. "You made it," she said. "I wasn't sure I would." "Most don't." Her voice was steady. No trace of surprise, no sign she doubted he'd come. Only certainty, like she'd seen this moment in a dream already lived. She turned without another word and walked toward the shelter's low entrance, her bare feet soundless on the dust. Elias followed, ducking beneath a crossbeam etched with faded spiral markings. Inside, the temperature dropped immediately. Cool air pooled in the shaded stone cavity like water in a dry creek bed. The space wasn't large, but it breathed like a living thing. Not a house, not quite a camp, a sanctum. Books lined the walls in tilted stacks, their pages curled at the edges. Rolled maps and hand-inked sketches were pinned above a heavy bench carved from ancient jarrah. Lanterns hung from twisted iron hooks, unlit but ready. The place smelled of dry earth, rust, and time. She moved with quiet purpose, brushing dust from a stool and lighting a single oil lamp with a practiced flick of a match. The flame caught with a soft breath. "You drove alone?" she asked, not looking at him. "Yes. No one knows you're here?" He shook his head. "Not even my team." She nodded once, satisfied. Then she gestured to the flat stone bench. "Show me." Elias unslung his satchel and unwrapped the cloth bundle with care. The object inside was small, dark, crescent-shaped, smooth as glass, and faintly marked with carved spirals. Celine leaned in, but didn't touch it. "You found it in fossil matrix?" she asked. "Yes, in the same layer as hadrosaur remains, but it doesn't belong there. No mineral trace, no decay." Her eyes flicked to his. "And the skull?" He hesitated. "I buried it. I shouldn't have, but you felt something." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She turned and crossed to a shelf, pulling down a thin black journal bound with thread. She opened it to a page filled with tight, handwritten notes and held it beside the object. The markings matched. Not just the pattern, but the hand. The same depth, the same flow. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. "You knew I'd find this," he said. "I didn't know it would be you," Celine replied, "but I knew someone would. It always resurfaces when it's needed." He stared at the journal. "What is it?" She exhaled through her nose, then sat. "It's a shard, a fragment of something bigger, an anchor." "Anchor?" Celine looked up. Her eyes were steady. Not mystical, not dramatic, just true. "There's a place not far from here," she said. "Cut into the land, older than the dreaming, older than memory. I believe the builders of these artifacts made it to hold time still, or at least to keep part of themselves from being lost in it." Elias stared at her across the soft pool of lantern light. For a long moment he said nothing. The room, the shelter, felt suddenly farther away, like they were suspended between worlds. The journal lay open beside the artifact, its spiral-marked page like an echo of something he couldn't quite remember. Or maybe something he was just beginning to. "To keep part of themselves," he repeated slowly. He sank into the low chair opposite her, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped. His eyes were fixed on the object between them, but his thoughts had already begun to drift elsewhere. "I used to think time was cruel," he said quietly, "that it only ever took. My wife, my kids, they're gone. And the world didn't pause, not for a second. Everything just kept moving forward like it didn't notice." Celine didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The silence let him go deeper. "I used to imagine what it would feel like if time could stretch. Just a little. Give me a moment longer, a breath, a heartbeat, something I could hold before it slipped away." He looked up at her, And the pain in his eyes wasn't raw anymore. It was etched, like the markings on the stone, deep, permanent. And now you're telling me someone tried to do exactly that. Celine's expression didn't change, but her voice softened. Not just someone, a whole people, facing something they couldn't stop, so they tried to anchor themselves to the only thing that could carry them beyond the end. Memory, she nodded, or consciousness, or the essence of being. Whatever name you give it, they believed the soul could echo. Elias leaned back, exhaling hard. The air felt heavier, denser. If that's true, he said, almost to himself, then what are we digging up, bones or fragments of them, of who they were? Celine's eyes held his. Maybe both. He went quiet again. Then, with a slow, almost reverent tone, he said, what if it's not just about them being remembered? What if they're trying to remember us? They left just before dusk. Celine packed light, 2 torches, a coil of rope, water, her leather-bound journal. She offered Elias a weathered satchel with a flashlight and a thin canvas wrap for the cold air below. No unnecessary words were spoken. They both understood this wasn't an academic excursion. This was something older. A crossing. The sun melted into the horizon as they crossed the basin on foot. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was deliberate, as if even the wind held its breath. The land changed as they walked. The scrub fell away. Stone took over, layered, rust-red and deep gray, veined with streaks of quartz and blackened mineral seams. The path narrowed into a natural cleft in the ridge. There, just before the wall of stone rose full before them, stood 3 more carved markers. Circular stones stacked like watchful eyes, each etched with a spiral that curled inward until it disappeared. Celine slowed. This is where the old boundary lies, she said softly. Between what and what? She looked at him. Between memory and the forgetting. Elias felt the words settle on his chest. Not metaphor. Truth. She reached forward and pressed her palm against a flat panel of rock, almost invisible to the untrained eye. A breath of cold air hissed from a newly revealed seam, and stone shifted with a low, grinding sigh. A narrow passage opened, man-made, but not recent. The cut was too smooth, too precise. It descended at a slight angle, lined in blackened walls that reflected the last light of day like smoked mirrors. Celine stepped inside. Elias followed. The air was immediately different, cool and dry, scented with dust and stone. It wrapped around him like memory. They descended in silence, their footfalls echoing faintly down the narrow tunnel. After several minutes, the corridor widened. The chamber opened before them. It was circular, domed, silent. Walls curved like the inside of a shell, marked in thousands of carved lines that glowed faintly under the beam of their torches, intersecting spirals, geometric flows, and a language neither of them could name. At the center stood the sphere, dark, fractured, still. Elias stopped at the edge of the platform. The weight of it pressed against his chest, not as fear, but as recognition. Celine's voice was nearly a whisper. It's been waiting. The chamber breathed around them, not in sound, but in presence. The obsidian sphere stood silent in the center, fractured yet whole, as though it had survived the end of something vast. Light shimmered faintly along the cracks, silver, pulsing, almost alive. Elias stared, motionless. Beside him, Celine's voice came low and measured. You don't have to do this tonight. He glanced at her. It called me here. I know, but even so, you can still walk away. Not everything ancient wants to be touched. Elias took a slow breath. The air felt heavy in his lungs. I've seen this place, he said, before I ever came. In dreams, visions, maybe. The sphere was whole then, lit from within. There were people, standing around it, watching me, like they knew me. Celine didn't flinch, he continued, voice quiet. When I saw the skull at the site, something moved inside me. Not fear, not awe, just familiarity. He looked down at his hand, then toward the sphere again. What if this isn't the first time I've stood here? Celine studied him. Her expression softened. I've asked myself the same question, she admitted, about places, about people, whether we carry more than blood through time, whether memory lingers, not in our minds, but in our bones. Elias met her eyes. And what if it does? Then maybe this is your return. Silence fell again. The sphere pulsed once, as if hearing them. Celine's voice dropped to a whisper. If you touch it, be ready to lose something. Elias turned back to the sphere. His jaw tightened. But there was no fear in his eyes now. I already have. And he stepped forward. He stepped slowly onto the dais. The moment Elias crossed the outermost ring etched into the stone floor, something shifted, subtle, not loud. The air felt different, denser, charged, like walking into a cathedral mid-prayer where silence was a living thing. The sphere loomed before him. It wasn't as large as he remembered from his dreams, just over 2 meters tall. But in its presence, size became meaningless. It radiated a pressure that wasn't sound, wasn't temperature, just gravity of a different kind. He reached out a hand. His fingertips hovered millimeters from the surface. The obsidian was fractured, but the cracks pulsed gently with that silvery light, as if beneath the skin 1,000 slow stars turned in perfect silence. He could hear his own breath now, feel the way his heart had begun to slow like it was synchronizing to something older, deeper. He closed the distance. The moment his fingers touched the sphere, a pulse shivered through the air, soft like the ringing of a distant bell. Not audible exactly, felt. The surface was cold, colder than it should have been, even this deep underground. But it wasn't the chill that unsettled him, it was the smoothness. Like glass that had never known imperfection, like time itself had never scarred it. And then came the pull, not physical, not pain, but something reached through the touch, into him. A thread, delicate as breath, stitched its way from the surface of the sphere into his mind, into memory, into something older than either. His eyes fluttered shut. He stood in light. No, not light. Memory. It unfolded around him like smoke, like dreams remembered just before waking. He wasn't in the chamber anymore. He wasn't anywhere solid. The world was a swirl of color and sensation. Golden fields under twin suns, high towers spiraled in translucent stone, figures moving with purpose across glimmering walkways, their faces strange and yet familiar. He saw a woman standing at the heart of it all, her hand pressed to a sphere just like his. Her face blurred by time, but her eyes, those eyes, he knew them. Annie. No, not Annie. But someone who carried the same presence, the same sorrow, the same love. The vision trembled, shifted, fire, collapse, a city falling inward. Screams carried not by sound but by emotion, a great, wordless cry, a plea not to be forgotten. Hold us, the voices said. Remember us. Let us echo. The memory fractured. He felt himself fall. Elias gasped and staggered back from the sphere, his legs barely catching him as he hit the floor on his knees. His hands trembled. The world around him was still the chamber, still stone and shadow, but he was not the same man who had entered it. Celine rushed forward. What happened? Elias didn't answer at first. He was staring at his hands like they weren't entirely his anymore. Then, quietly, they were real. Celine knelt beside him. They were people, he said. Not gods, not myths, just people, trying not to vanish. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Elias looked up at the sphere, now glowing faintly brighter than before. And they're still here. They emerged from the chamber long after night had claimed the sky. The stars were fierce above them, sharp, clean, countless. A vast silence stretched in every direction, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps on dry stone. Elias walked slowly, the weight of what he'd seen still pressing against his chest. The air felt thinner somehow, like the world had lost a layer since they descended. He hadn't spoken since they left the sphere. Celine didn't rush him. They passed the ridge markers in silence. The spirals glowed faintly in the starlight, like echoes of the sphere pulsing in the earth itself. The desert around them felt different now, not just ancient, but awake. Finally, as they neared the camp, Celine spoke. You saw them, didn't you? He nodded, his voice still catching in his throat. I saw people, cities, a woman. She looked like, he shook his head. I don't know who she was, but I felt like I'd known her all my life. Celine's brow furrowed. Sometimes the memory is stronger than the face. Sometimes it's a feeling that finds you before the meaning does. They reached the clearing near the shelter. The lanterns inside still glowed faintly through the canvas, casting golden rectangles on the ground. Elias stopped and turned to her. How long have you known that the sphere held more than data? She gave a faint, almost bitter smile. Since the first time I touched it, it was dormant then. But it showed me pieces, like waking up to someone else's dream. Elias looked up at the stars. It wasn't just a vision. It felt like it remembered me, like I'd left something behind and it gave it back. Celine said nothing for a moment. Then, maybe you did. They stood in the starlight, the camp silent around them, the chamber behind them humming faintly in the bedrock. For the first time since the dig began, Elias didn't feel lost in time. He felt woven into it. The desert wind had died down by the time Elias and Celine emerged from the underground passage. The sky above them was a canvas of indigo and ash, flecked with a few stubborn stars piercing through the creeping veil of cloud. Their boots crunched over the red grit as they moved in silence, the echo of what had just transpired still thick between them. Elias didn't speak. He walked with his shoulders hunched forward, arms tight at his sides, like the weight of the chamber still pressed against his skin. His eyes, once sharp and alert, seemed distant, searching someplace far beyond the horizon. Celine tried to catch his gaze. Elias? He didn't respond. Back at the camp, the fire had burned low, and the hum of the solar generator barely broke the stillness. Celine handed Elias a flask of water, but he only stared at it, then lowered himself to the ground beside one of the supply crates and rubbed his temples with trembling fingers. She crouched nearby, watching him from the side. "Talk to me. What did you see down there?" He finally looked at her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Awe, fear, and something else, like he was no longer entirely tethered to the present. "It wasn't a memory," he said hoarsely. "It was alive, not just the sphere, the whole place, like the stone was dreaming, and I—" He stopped, clenched his jaw. "I touched its mind, Celine, or maybe it touched mine." He leaned forward abruptly and grabbed a weather-stained journal from his gear, flipping it open and scrawling with shaking hands. Spirals, jagged lines, sequences of dots that might have been coordinates or glyphs, symbols that weren't in any known language but looked oddly familiar, as though drawn from the bones of a forgotten alphabet. Celine approached cautiously. "You need to rest." "There's no time for rest," he muttered. "It's all coming back. The structure was waiting for someone to listen. It's not a vault. It's a beacon. No, a key. A lockbox holding memory itself." He scribbled faster, ink smudged under his palm. "I saw a world crumbling under ash, cities devoured by silence, but I also saw a renewal. Fractals of green rising through dust, voices remembered in the wind." "Elias, slow down." Celine knelt beside him, placing a steadying hand on his arm. "You're not making sense." "I'm remembering," he said, almost defiantly, "or becoming the memory. I don't know. It's not linear. None of it is linear. Time bends inside that place. It's like the builders pulled their consciousness out of their own death and pressed it into the walls." Celine's concern deepened as she watched him. Sweat beaded along his forehead despite the cool air. His hands were dusted in red earth, and his lips trembled as he whispered phrases under his breath, sometimes in English, sometimes in something that sounded older. He suddenly stopped writing and looked up at her. "Have you ever felt like your thoughts weren't entirely your own?" The question sent a chill down her spine. She forced a calmness into her voice. "Elias, listen to me. Whatever that thing did to you, we need to be careful. You're not alone in this. We can document it. We can analyze." "I don't want to analyze it," he snapped, eyes flaring. "I want to understand it, before they come and take it away." Celine's brow furrowed. "Who's they?" He hesitated. "The council, the ones watching. You think they don't know what we found? That satellite link didn't go down by accident." She stood, tension rising. "You think they've been monitoring us this whole time?" "I know they have," he said grimly, "and they won't let this stay in the open. They'll bury it, like they've buried everything else." Celine stepped away, conflicted. She looked toward the low ridge where their satellite array sat blinking faintly against the horizon. Maybe he was paranoid, or maybe he was right. Behind her, Elias had gone back to his sketches, humming something under his breath, a rhythm that made her stomach knot. She recognized the cadence. It was the same strange pulse she had felt faintly when she touched the stone wall in the chamber, a rhythm like a heartbeat stretched across time. As the fire crackled and the desert cooled, Celine watched her friend begin to unravel. No, to transform. And she realized, whatever they had awakened beneath the sand, it was not finished with them yet. The air hung heavy that night, warmer than it should have been. Even as the desert's usual chill descended, the camp seemed to hold its breath. The hum of the generator had stopped. Celine had cut it deliberately, hoping the silence might help Elias sleep. But she knew better than to believe he would. She lay in her tent, eyes wide, listening. At first it was nothing, just the desert sighing, shifting, a gust of wind through the scrub. Then came the sound, the rhythm, soft, measured, faintly musical. Dum-dum. It was the same beat he had been humming, the same strange cadence she'd felt pulsing faintly from the walls of the underground chamber. A rhythm that didn't belong to any machine. Celine threw back her blanket and stepped into the night, boots crunching softly on gravel. The stars above were dulled by high cloud, and her breath fogged faintly in the air. The camp was dim, lit only by the coals of the fire. Elias was gone. His bedroll was empty, barely disturbed, but his journal remained beside it, open, pages fluttering in the light breeze. Celine snatched it and scanned the latest page. There were no diagrams this time. Only a single repeated line, over and over, in handwriting that grew larger and more erratic with each line. "We are not the first. We are not the first. We are not the first." A flicker of movement caught her eye beyond the rise. She turned, heart pounding. Elias stood alone in the distance, silhouetted against the low moonlight. He faced away from her, arms slack by his sides, his head tilted slightly, like he was listening. No flashlight, no gear, just him in the dust. Celine followed quietly, weaving between scattered stones and scrub. As she drew closer, she heard him speaking, but the words weren't in English. They weren't in any recognizable language. The syllables rolled like water over stone, gentle, melodic, rhythmic. A chant? A song? She couldn't tell. There was something ancient in the cadence, something that prickled her skin. "Elias," she said softly. He didn't turn. "Elias, what are you saying?" He raised his hand slowly, pointing outward toward the darkness, toward nothing. Then he finally spoke in English. "They're listening now." "Who is?" "The ones who came before," he whispered. "The ones who laid the seed beneath our bones. I hear them, Celine. They've been waiting." He turned to face her. Moonlight caught the edge of his face, and Celine flinched. His pupils were dilated, but it wasn't just that. His expression was too calm, too other. "What did they say?" "That we're standing at the mouth of a memory," he said. "And memories demand witnesses. That's why they called me." Celine's throat tightened. "You said they, not it. You think there's more than one?" "There were always more than one," Elias murmured. "Whole civilizations layered like sediment, buried deep, forgotten until now." He took a few steps forward, barefoot now. The dust didn't seem to bother him. He looked like a pilgrim or a man possessed. Celine reached out and gently grabbed his wrist. "Come back to camp. Please, you're not alone in this." He blinked, and for a moment his eyes cleared. "I know," he said softly. "That's why I need you to remember what you saw too, in the chamber." Celine hesitated. She had felt something, a pull, a pressure behind her eyes, as if the walls had tried to breathe through her. But she had buried that feeling. Now, standing in the dark beside Elias, she wasn't sure she could anymore. He squeezed her hand, grounding them both. "I think they're testing us, seeing if we'll listen, or walk away again like the last ones." "And what happens if we pass?" she asked. His eyes turned back to the horizon, toward the chamber buried beneath the rock. "Then maybe, just maybe, we get to remember who we were meant to be." By morning the wind had returned, dry and restless, sweeping sand in low, whispering arcs across the dig site. Elias hadn't slept. He sat hunched near the edge of camp, still barefoot, eyes fixed on the horizon as if awaiting some celestial reply. The sun painted him in gold and fire, but he didn't seem to notice. Celine stood behind him, arms folded tight across her chest, watching. She hadn't slept either. The events of the previous night looped in her mind like a riddle she couldn't solve. Elias's chanting, the language, the hum beneath her own skin. And now this, his stillness, eerie in its calm, like a storm had passed through him and left silence in its wake. She broke it. "I need you to come back to Earth, Elias." He didn't move. "I'm serious," she said, stepping closer. "You're speaking in languages no one knows, wandering barefoot through the desert like a prophet, and writing pages that read like transmissions from another lifetime." He tilted his head slightly. "Maybe they are." Celine narrowed her eyes. "I'm not here for riddles. I'm here to uncover truth, not fall into someone else's hallucination." Elias turned to face her slowly. "You think this is delusion?" "I think something changed you in that chamber," she said, "and I think it's trying to rewrite you." "I'm not being rewritten." His voice was calm, eerily so. "I'm being restored." There's a difference. Celine's jaw tightened. Listen to yourself. He stood now, brushing the dust from his palms, stepping toward her. You felt it too. Don't lie to yourself. The resonance, the knowing. You think that ache in your chest when we first uncovered the glyphs was just curiosity? Celine took a step back. I felt something, yes, a presence, maybe even an intelligence, but that doesn't mean we hand over our minds to it. They're not invading us, Elias said. They're inviting us. That chamber, it's not a prison, it's a memory field, a vault holding what they were, waiting to be seen again. Felt, recovered. His words were fervent now, burning through the dry air like sparks. They burned their names into time, Celine, into the stone and soil, so that when we were ready, truly ready, we could remember them. Learn from their collapse. Choose a different future. Celine ran a hand through her hair, grounding herself. Do you hear what you're saying? You sound like a priest from some half-forgotten religion. Elias stepped forward, voice dropping. What if that's what science was always meant to become? That stopped her. They stood in silence for a moment, the desert wind whipping between them. Celine finally broke the stillness. And what about the council? Do you think they'll see it that way? They're going to want samples, reports, you, under observation. Elias looked toward the ridge where the comm dish still blinked faintly. They already know. They've been watching, listening. Celine's eyes widened. What? He nodded. I saw it in the transmission logs last night. A relay pinged back to orbit during the storm. Automated, but piggybacked. Someone upstream knows what we found. Celine exhaled slowly. And what do they want? To erase it, or weaponize it, like everything else. She didn't want to believe him, but in her gut, she already did. Elias stepped closer, softer now. We still have a choice, you and me. We can show them the truth, or we can protect it long enough for others to see it too. People who are ready. Celine looked into his eyes. The man she had known, the brilliant, grief-hollowed scientist, was still there. But something ancient stood beside him now, just behind his gaze. Not possession, not madness. Something else. Understanding. She turned away and stared out at the desert. The wind tugged at her coat like a child's hand. I don't know if I believe what you're saying, she said, but I do believe you believe it. She turned back. So if we're doing this, I'm going to need to see it for myself. All of it. Elias nodded, the edge of a smile ghosting his lips. Then we go deeper. The sky was washed in pale gray when the signal came. Celine had returned to the comm terminal out of habit more than hope. She powered it on, brushing a fine layer of red dust from the screen. For a moment, only static greeted her. Then the feed cut through. The Global Council's seal, black and gold, flashed briefly before dissolving into the stern face of Director Asha Ivor, head of Archaeospatial Oversight. Her silver hair was pulled tight, her eyes sharp and unforgiving. There was no warmth in her voice. Dr. Celine Vey, status report. Celine swallowed and straightened instinctively. Director, I wasn't aware a live relay had been established again. It wasn't. Until 17 hours ago, when your site transmitted an unscheduled burst through a dormant channel. We traced the signal. It wasn't human code. Celine glanced at Elias, who stood just beyond the tent flap, arms crossed. He heard every word. What sort of code? She asked carefully. Resonance-based modulation. Rhythmic, repeating, possibly symbolic. We're running linguistic reconstructions now, but the origin point was underground. A pause. I believe you found something, Dr. Vey. Celine hesitated. We've uncovered a subchamber. There's a structure, like a core. We haven't fully mapped it yet. Is Dr. Shaw fit for duty? Ivor's tone shifted. We're seeing anomalies in his biometric readouts. Celine tensed. She hadn't authorized any data syncs from Elias's implant. How were they monitoring? Ivor leaned closer to the camera, voice low. You need to sedate him. Secure the artifact site. Do not let him re-enter the chamber. On what authority? Celine snapped before she could stop herself. Ivor's expression hardened. On the authority of every failed protocol we've enforced over 50 years of containment. We've seen what happens when teams go native, when belief overrides data. If the builders were transmitting anything, we cannot risk contamination. Celine gritted her teeth. You mean we can't risk understanding? I mean you're not equipped to handle what you've awakened. None of you are. Extraction will arrive within 48 hours. Until then, contain it and contain him. The screen went dark. Celine stood frozen in the flickering tent light, her pulse hammering. She felt Elias before she heard him speak. So that's it. They're going to take it. She turned, finding him already inside, eyes shadowed. They've been watching since the storm, since before the storm. They don't care what we found, only what they can control. Celine exhaled slowly. They want me to sedate you. Elias cracked a bitter smile. And will you? She didn't answer. Instead, she shut down the terminal and began packing her satchel. He blinked. What are you doing? Shutting down the comms, burying the sensor logs. If they want it, they'll have to find it without our coordinates. Elias stepped forward. You're sure? No, she said honestly. But I trust the evidence, and the evidence says we're standing on something that remembers. If that memory is sentient or sacred, then the last thing I'm going to do is drug the only person it chose to speak to. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once. We'll need to go back before they get here. To the core, to the heart of it all. Celine zipped the satchel shut and shouldered it. Then we better leave before the sky turns. Outside, the wind began to pick up, and with it, that hum, faint but rising. A low vibration threading through the bones of the earth, calling them back into memory. They moved fast. Within the hour, Celine and Elias had dismantled the camp's uplink antenna and scrubbed the site logs. Elias destroyed the biometric relay from his neck with a makeshift cauterizer. His teeth gritted, breath sharp as Celine held his shoulder. He didn't flinch. There wasn't time. The council's team would arrive within 2 days, less if they deployed high-altitude dropships. They had one chance to reach the core before it was sealed behind bureaucracy, fear, or worse, silence. The desert swallowed their footprints as they descended into the lower dig shaft. The opening looked almost like a wound now, dark and pulsing at the edge of vision. The dust seemed to hush as they passed. Even the wind quieted. They didn't speak until they were deep inside the chamber. The stone swallowed sound as before, but now it felt closer, almost welcoming. The glyphs on the walls shimmered faintly under their torches, as though sensing their return. Celine paused at the threshold to the final corridor. If we do this, we're walking off the edge of every protocol we've ever followed. Elias nodded. They were made to stop us from falling. But what if falling is the only way forward? Celine didn't answer. She stepped inside. They walked side by side deeper than they'd gone before, past the collapsed alcoves and dead-end dig paths. The hum grew stronger, not loud but present, a physical pressure that rose behind the eyes and across the sternum. Then the passage opened. The chamber was vast and cathedral-like. This time it pulsed with a low light from its heart, an enormous crystalline structure suspended in the air, like a geode split open and frozen mid-bloom. The same rhythm beat from within it, dum-dum, dum-dum, steady, ancient. Elias stopped at the edge. This is the source. Celine stared at it in awe. It's alive, he turned to her. This isn't just memory, it's intention, design. They built this to respond, to connect with us if we were willing. Celine's voice was barely a whisper. Then what does it want now? Elias looked toward the structure, to be remembered, to be carried forward. That's why it didn't transmit until we arrived. It waited for resonance, mind and memory aligned. He stepped forward, slowly, reverently, toward the interface. Celine grabbed his arm. Wait, what if it changes you again? He met her gaze. What if it already has? Silence. Then Celine let go. Elias approached the crystalline core. The structure rippled faintly at his presence, like water trembling beneath a finger. He placed his hand on its surface, and the chamber responded. The hum rose. Light surged outward in concentric pulses, flowing over the walls, illuminating ancient glyphs and murals that hadn't been visible before. Scenes of towering cities, planets in harmony, the collapse of civilizations, and their rebirth. Celine gasped. The chamber was showing them history, not just of one world, but many, a timeline unfurling like DNA across the stone. Each civilization had reached a point of ruin. Each had tried to encode their knowledge into memory before the end. And this place, this chamber, was the repository, a sacred convergence. But it was more than that. It was a seed. And Elias was the soil. He staggered back, eyes wide, breath ragged. They gave us the map. To what? To us. Who we were before forgetting, who we might be if we choose differently. Celine stood beside him now, hand brushing his. And the council? What happens when they find this? He shook his head. They can't. Not yet. They'll treat it like a weapon, a threat. But this isn't a threat. It's a mirror, one that shows what we're afraid to face. Celine looked around the chamber, then at the glowing core. So what do we do? Elias's voice was clear. We stay, we guard it, we listen, and when the world is ready, we help them remember. Celine looked at him, then back at the murals glowing on the walls. Then we stay. They sat in silence as the chamber thrummed around them, two witnesses to an echo older than any story, deeper than any ruin. In that moment, they were no longer archaeologists. They were stewards of memory. The air within the heart chamber shimmered now, soft ripples of heatless light drifting across the crystalline core like breath on glass. Every surface glowed faintly with embedded glyphs, not etched but grown, like veins through quartz. The hum had changed too. No longer a rhythm, it had become a voice without words. Celine stepped closer, her face bathed in the glow. It's synchronizing, she whispered, like it's reading us. Elias stood transfixed, his eyes locked on the pulsating nexus. No, not reading, sharing. The light deepened. Without thinking, Elias placed his hand again on the crystalline surface. This time it didn't resist, it welcomed. A beam of blue-white light arced from the core into his chest. He staggered, breath ripped from his lungs, knees buckling as memories not his own surged into his mind. Celine rushed forward, but stopped short. The chamber responded to her presence. Another beam formed, gentler, slower, and reached toward her fingertips. She hesitated, heart racing. Then she touched it. A flood of sensation overtook them both. Time collapsed. They stood in a city of mirrored stone beneath twin suns, skyscrapers spiraling like seashells, gardens suspended in air, oceans of cloud rolling over green towers. Voices echoed around them, laughter, prayer, songs not made for human mouths. Then, fire, a great sundering. The skies turned black, the oceans boiled. The song became screams. And beneath it all, a choice left unmade. The vision shifted. They stood now in an empty library built of stars. Shelves of light stretched in all directions, each one a memory, a world, a civilization that rose, shone, and fell. Some had passed gently, others violently. All had left their stories behind. Then came the seed, not an object but a principle, a truth carried like DNA across galaxies, not to preserve power, but to preserve wisdom, to give the next ones a chance to do better. The vision faded, the chamber dimming again, the beams withdrawing into the crystal core. Elias collapsed to one knee, tears tracking silently down his dust-caked face. Celine fell beside him, her breath ragged, her voice barely audible. We weren't meant to find this by accident. Elias nodded slowly. No, we were meant to inherit it. Not the technology, but the lesson. Celine's fingers curled into the sand. So many tried and failed. Because they forgot, Elias whispered. They buried memory beneath ambition, progress, and fear. But the builders found a way to remember forward, by embedding themselves into the fabric of time, waiting for minds ready to receive. He looked up at the core, eyes wide. We're not just studying the past anymore. We are the past, looking back at itself through new eyes. Celine stared at him, realization dawning. That's what the sphere showed you, isn't it? The collapse, the restart. The pattern, he nodded, but also the interruption, a chance to stop repeating. This chamber, it's a signal, a warning, and a choice. Celine stood slowly, her voice steadier now. Then we carry it, not just the data, but the responsibility. We protect it, share it, but only when the world is ready to listen. Elias rose beside her, and if it never is, she met his gaze, then we wait like they did. Behind them, the core pulsed once more, softly, like a heartbeat at rest. But somewhere, deep in its radiant center, the builders watched through borrowed eyes and remembered through borrowed minds, and the earth listened. The glow of the core had softened to a gentle pulse, no longer insistent but attentive, like an eye half-lidded in rest, still watching. Celine and Elias sat in the outer ring of the chamber, silent. Hours, maybe more, had passed since the revelation. Neither had spoken. Words felt too small. They were still unspooling what had been poured into them. Visions, wisdom, sorrow, and choice. Finally, Elias broke the silence. They didn't fail. Celine looked at him, brow furrowed. The ones before us, he said, voice low. They didn't fail because they destroyed themselves. They failed because they stopped listening. They grew deaf to the memory that made them who they were. Celine nodded, her voice soft. Like we did. We built over ruins without asking why they were ruins in the first place. He turned to her, eyes sharp despite his exhaustion. But this chamber, it's not just a warning, it's a test. Of what? Our humility, our ability to learn, to remember, to choose differently. Celine stared at the crystalline structure. Its light pulsed in rhythm, still aligned with Elias's heartbeat. She could feel it in her own chest now too, faint but synchronized. What if we tell the world? She asked. Share what we saw, the memories, the vision. He looked down. They'll mock it, twist it, use it. But if we stay silent, it dies here. Elias stood, brushing dust from his clothes. That's the paradox. It's both too dangerous to reveal and too important to hide. But maybe, Celine tilted her head. Maybe what? He turned to her slowly. Maybe it was never meant to be told. Maybe it was meant to be lived, one choice at a time. She rose beside him. You mean, we become the memory, the message? Exactly. He pointed to the murals on the wall, the rise, the fall, the seed. We carry it in how we build, how we teach, how we live on this planet and with each other. Celine exhaled, the enormity settling over her, a new beginning. Elias looked back at the core, or a final warning. The light from the chamber shifted subtly. The glyphs across the stone dimmed, except for one, newly revealed, glowing softly, a spiral nested within a circle. The same symbol that had appeared in Elias's dreams long before the mission began. He smiled faintly. They've left us a path. Celine stared at it, recognizing now what it truly was. Not just a symbol, but a promise. That memory could be more than history. It could be seeded into future choices, future hearts. She placed her hand on the wall beneath it. We'll follow it. Above them, the world remained unaware. The council was coming, with drones and directives, prepared to control or erase what they didn't understand. But below, in the chamber of remembrance, something had changed. Not just the stone, not just the light, but them. And somewhere across the stars, across time, echoes stirred in ancient silence. The storm arrived at dawn. Not a weather system, but the rumble of engines, a fleet of descending VTOLs slicing through the morning sky, their black hulls glinting with council insignia. Dust churned in great spirals as boots hit the sand, and containment drones deployed in a widening perimeter around the dig site. They were early. Celine and Elias watched from the ridge above, hidden beneath the craggy overhang that shielded the entrance to the memory chamber. The sky behind them was still streaked with pale orange, the last threads of night giving way to day. Celine held the satellite tracker in her palm, now dark, its transmitter permanently fried. She had made sure of that. They'll find the chamber eventually, she said. Elias nodded, face unreadable. But they won't find what we found, not unless we let them. He reached into his satchel and withdrew the last piece of data crystal, copied from the core's pulse, encoded with the visions they had seen. Memory, intention, and design compressed into a sliver of radiant lattice. Celine stared at it, her voice low. If we destroy it, the truth dies with us. And if we hand it over, Elias said, it becomes a tool, a weapon, another thing to bury under fear. The wind picked up. Below, council agents spread out, their movements precise and practiced. Some scanned with LiDAR, others carried sterilization canisters. One team was already setting up a perimeter around the collapsed dig shaft. They'll be at the entrance in less than an hour, Celine said. Elias turned the crystal in his fingers. Light shimmered within, fractals blooming and fading in quick succession, like memories blinking awake. Maybe that's the point, he said. Celine looked at him. He met her gaze. They were never trying to preserve a civilization. They were trying to protect the possibility of one. Not the memory itself, but the meaning behind it. That's what this place is, a mirror, a choice. And the choice is now ours. He handed her the crystal. Celine stared down at it, feeling the weight of everything it carried. Behind them, the chamber pulsed once more, subtle, rhythmic, a final echo of welcome. She looked back at Elias. What if no one ever comes again? Then at least it won't be because we gave it to the wrong hands. He placed his palm on the wall just beside the core, a place they had not touched before. The stone responded instantly, opening with a whisper of shifting rock. A hidden recess. Small, deep, waiting. Celine stepped forward and with a breath slid the crystal inside. The wall closed seamlessly, and with it the burden of their choice was sealed. Not erased, not hidden, but guarded. For another time, another people, another awakening. Outside, the sound of machinery grew closer. The ground trembled as excavation teams breached the lower shaft. Celine turned to Elias. "What now?" He looked toward the rising sun. "Now," he said, "we vanish." And so they did. By the time the council reached the core, the chamber was silent again. Empty. No light. No resonance. The memory had withdrawn. But deep within the stone, beneath protocol and fear, a seed remained. Waiting. Weeks passed. The council sealed the site within days of the incursion. The official report cited a collapsed dig corridor, unstable terrain, and incomplete findings. No mention of resonance. No mention of the chamber. Celine's name was scrubbed from the project's public logs. Elias's biometric signature was never recovered. Off the record, whispers spread. Unexplained anomalies in the ground's magnetic field. Satellite relays disrupted within a 30-kilometer radius. Drone footage corrupted beyond recovery. What data did reach the council's archive was inconclusive, a mystery sealed and filed. But the desert remembered, and so did the wind. Somewhere far from the coordinates now blacked out on every map, a ripple moved through the sand. Subtle, rhythmic, not seen but felt. At night, travelers sometimes spoke of a soft glow rising briefly from a broken ridge, a pulse of light from the earth itself, like a heartbeat echoing through stone. Local guides called it a mirage, an old place stirring. In an unmarked cabin on the fringe of an abandoned observatory in Patagonia, Celine finished writing her final log. Her hand trembled slightly as she closed the journal and sealed it in a box lined with old satellite maps and sketches. Elias stood nearby, watching the sky. "Do you think they'll ever find it again?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, "but not with sensors or orders. They'll need to arrive the way we did, empty-handed, listening." She smiled faintly. "And if they don't?" Elias didn't answer at first. Then he looked at her and said, "Then memory waits." Far beneath the earth, behind walls of silent stone, the chamber slumbered. But deep within its crystalline heart, the spiral symbol glowed. Not fading, not forgotten, just waiting to be remembered.